Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Amit Harari, and coming up in today's newscast, unrest in Israel continuing amidst a series of deadly terror attacks this week, at least 2 murdered and over 2 dozen severely injured. Meanwhile, Israeli wallets in increasing pain as inflation continues to spike despite year-long wage stagnation. And later, the UN finally approving of an incredible international entrepreneurship program sponsored by Jerusalem. An 18-year-old man was moderately injured after being run over this morning while walking on the street in Beersheba, southern Israel, with the police saying that a suspicion of a nationalistic background is also being investigated, with the background being fear of inspired attack following Wednesday's deadly bombing in Jerusalem. The young man, a student at the Air Force Technical School in the city, was wearing a uniform. In the documentation of the event, the vehicle in which the offending driver is seen gets on the sidewalk, driving towards the young man and throwing him in the air. The driver, a 39-year-old resident of Raat, was arrested after being taken for medical treatment, as the initial investigation revealing that the man has no criminal record. The police are investigating all possible directions from security to criminal. Under heavy pressures from all sides, Palestinian terrorists in Jenin finally returning to the body of Israeli teenager Tiran Fero, and this roughly a day after killing and kidnapping the injured high schooler from a hospital in Judea and Samaria. ILTV's Aaron Porras with a story.
The body of Druze Israeli teenager Tiran Fero finally returned to his family for burial Thursday morning, some 30 hours after Palestinian terrorists effectively murdered him by disconnecting him from life support in hospital in Jenin and abducting his body. The 18-year-old Tiran was a 12th grade student from Daliat al-Carmel in Israel, described as a caring young man who never hurt anyone, and he was hospitalized near the American University campus following a car accident.
רוצה לפנות לחוטפים. בסך הכל אתם חטפתם נער ילד שעדיין בתיכון, ילד בן 18, אין עוול בכפיו, כל מטרתו הייתה לעשות שיפור לרכב שלו. אני מבקש מכם, אני מסתכל עליכם בעיניים ואומר לכם, אל תרחמו עלינו, תרחמו על אמא שלו, כי היא בסך הכל אמא, והיא רוצה לראות את הבן שלה.
But the Palestinian terrorists not returning Fero from the goodness of their hearts. Originally accusing the teen of being an undercover IDF plant, they hoped to exchange his remains for convicted and imprisoned Palestinian terrorists. It wasn't until after immense pressure from all sides, including the Druze community, the Palestinian Authority, the IDF, which blocked the city of Jenin, and the Israeli government, which issued a stark warning to the kidnappers, that Fero was returned. Speaking Wednesday afternoon, Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid saying the nation knows well how to stand against those who seek Israel's demise.
ישראל הוכיחה בחודשים האחרונים שאין מקום ואין מחבל שהיא לא יודעת להגיע אליו. מהקסבה בשכם, מחנה הפליטים בג'נין, לזירות קרובות ורחוקות. אם גופתו של טירן לא תוחזר, החוטפים ישלמו מחיר יקר.
That said, it was likely under the threats from the Druze community itself that tipped the scales in favor of Tiran's return. Shortly after Fero's murder and abduction, the enraged Druze marched towards Jenin, blocked roads, protested, and allegedly even kidnapped some 4 Palestinian Arabs from nearby villages. Videos of the apparently abducted Palestinians showing their captors threatening to murder them and others until Fero was released. All the Palestinians, including 3 from Hebron, have since been returned. Still, the same cannot be said of the Israelis held in captivity by Palestinian terrorists in the Gaza Strip. Palestinian terrorists often work to kidnap Israeli citizens, dead or alive, to be used as bargaining chips against Jerusalem, especially after the successful trade of captured IDF soldier Gilad Shalit for over 1,000 jailed Palestinians in 2011. And for over 8 years until this day, Hamas is holding on to 4 Israeli citizens, the bodies of IDF soldiers Hadar Golden and Oron Shaul, killed and kidnapped by Hamas after a ceasefire was in effect. And then Hisham al-Sayed and Avera Mengistu, 2 Israeli civilians who suffer from mental illness, held alive in Hamas's captivity since 2014 and 2015. The demands for their release far higher than those agreed to in the Gilad Shalit exchange.
4 victims of yesterday's bus stop bombings in Jerusalem remain in hospital, one in life-threatening condition. The lone fatality so far, 16-year-old Canadian-Israeli yeshiva student Aryeh Shupak, has been laid to rest. Security forces are following all leads to capture the terrorists responsible for the attack, and extra police are deployed around the capital. ILTV's Steve Leibovitz reports.
A number of victims in yesterday's bomb blasts remain in hospital. 4 of the wounded are in serious condition and 1 has life-threatening injuries. Conforming with Orthodox Jewish tradition, by early evening, the victim's 16-year-old Canadian-Israeli yeshiva student, Aryeh Shupak, was laid to rest. Hundreds attended the funeral of the young Bible student who was on his way to study when the terrorist attack took his life. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau sent condolences to the Shupak family, tweeting, "Canada condemns this terrorist violence in the strongest possible terms." U.S. Ambassador Tom Knights noted that 2 of the wounded were American citizens. He tweeted, "As we head into Thanksgiving, I am grateful that they will recover. I pray for a peaceful holiday in the U.S. and Jerusalem." Prime Minister Yair Lapid said this.
אני רוצה תחילה לשלוח את תנחומיה של ממשלת ישראל, למשפחת ההרוג, אריה שופק, זכרו לברכה, נער שלא עשה דבר רע לאף אדם בעולם. נרצח רק מפני שהוא יהודי. אני שולח איחולי החלמה ורפואה שלמה לפצועים.
Police bolstered forces in Jerusalem and other parts of the country while launching an intensive manhunt for the suspected terrorist cell that detonated the devices. Police Chief Kobi Shabtai said the focus remained in Jerusalem and the attackers were still at large.
אנחנו נעשה כל שביכולתנו ביחד עם כל גורמי הביטחון האחרים ונגיע לחוליה הזאת. כרגע אני מבקש מהאזרחים לגלות ערנות, כל מי שמזהה איזה חפץ חשוד, להתקשר 100, אנחנו נדאג לשלוח את הכוחות המקצועיים לטפל בזה. תודה רבה והחלמה מהירה לפצועים.
The presumed incoming Minister of Internal Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, visited the site of the bombing and said that in his view, Israeli policy had to get much tougher.
לגבות מחיר מהטרור זה לבדוק מאיפה המחבל או המחבלים האלה יוצאים, להגיע לאותו כפר, בין אם זה בתוך תחומי מדינת ישראל הקטנה ובין אם זה ביהודה ושומרון, להטיל עוצר, בית, לעבור בית, לחפש נשקים, להחזיר את ההרתעה ולהחזיר את המשילות.
Security forces are concerned that the cell will continue bombing attempts until they are captured or killed. In the meantime, the public must remain vigilant and report any suspicious objects.
With us now with more on the latest security updates is Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs Research Fellow and journalist Yoni Ben Menachem. Thank you for joining us, Yoni.
You're welcome.
So, 2 remote-controlled bombs at bus stops. This seems likely to be the work of a terror cell rather than a lone wolf. Where is believed the group is based in, and how are they connected? Are they connected to one of the terror organizations, Hamas or Islamic Jihad?
It seems like a very organized terror group which is associated or operated by maybe one of the terrorist organization in Gaza Strip, either the Hamas or the Islamic Jihad. There's also a possibility that this group belongs to ISIS or even the Popular Front. All these organizations that I mentioned have experience in exploding or donating bombs with remote control. This is what happened yesterday when the charges were operated by a cellular phone. And now the Israeli Shin Bet, the Shabak, and the Israeli police are trying to get to the people who carried out these 2 attacks. There is police activity in East Jerusalem itself, in some of the neighborhoods, and also in the villages north of Jerusalem, like Bet Iksa, where the suspicion is that maybe some of the residents there are involved in the attacks.
We saw celebrations in different places in Israel, also in Gaza. How come no one took responsibility yet?
They don't want to take responsibility because they don't want to be exposed to international pressure or to Israeli retaliation. If one of the terrorist organizations will claim responsibility, it's only a matter of time till Israel will retaliate and attack targets of this organization in Gaza. So this is why they are keeping quiet.
Just today, the security services announced the arrest of a Gaza man with an Israeli work permit for plotting to a bus bomb in the south. What more can the security services do currently to curb the current terrorist threat?
It's obvious that the center of the terrorism is in Gaza Strip, where all the terrorist organizations, especially Hamas and Islamic Jihad, are trying to recruit Palestinians from the West Bank, and also Palestinian workers from Gaza who work in Israel, and this is what happened. They train them and they give them orders to carry out terror attacks. What is alarming is that apparently Hamas is returning to the method of putting bombs in buses, in restaurants, in public places. And this can be an indication that maybe Hamas is involved in the terror attacks in Jerusalem.
Now, changing direction to the kidnapping of a critically wounded Druze teen, Tiran Fero, who died after being snatched from the hospital in Jenin by a terrorist gang. Thankfully, after a day, the body has been returned. What were the major factors in securing his release? A little bit about the negotiations.
Well, just a while ago, the Palestinian Authority, through its news agency, Wafa, they issued a statement saying that the release of the body of Tiran Fero was done thanks to the efforts of the PA chairman Abu Mazen and the head of the Palestinian security, Majid Faraj. So they want to take the credit for the release of this body, but actually I think that the armed terrorists who kidnapped the body, they were afraid from the retaliation of the Israeli army that will go into Jenin and rescue the body by force, and also they were afraid of the retaliation of the Druze community, who threatened also some elements in the Druze community, also threatened to take revenge if they don't return the body, and I think this is the pressure that finally made them return the body.
So, Yoni, about that community, the Druze community is Arabic-speaking and very loyal to the state of Israel. If necessary, would the Israeli army have risked the lives of soldiers to retrieve the body? I mean, we know stories like Holon Shaul and Adar Goldin. What's different here?
The difference is here that in Jenin is surrounded by roadblocks of the Israeli army, and the army can impose closure and go in and bring the body. In Gaza, it's a different situation. There is a border, and it's a large terrain, and there are a lot of hostile forces.
But still,
Hamas, Islamic Jihad.
No one had to go in. I mean, they brought him back.
Yes, they brought him back because it was only a matter of time. They wouldn't bring him back, that the IDF would go in and bring the body by force. And apparently the Palestinian Authority didn't want this escalation, and they put the pressure on this terrorist group to return the body, and this is what finally happened.
Yoni Ben Menachem, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
On to an unbelievable story. 52-year-old Yuri Volkov was stabbed to death in the central city of Holon after getting into an argument with a motorized scooter driver as he crossed the street Wednesday night. According to police, Volkov, who worked as a healthcare aide at the Ichilov hospital in Tel Aviv, entered into a verbal argument with a scooter driver who stabbed him to death as he crossed the street. He was pronounced dead after he rushed to Walshon Hospital with severe injuries. Security cameras in the scene show Volkov's wife crossing the street while the crosswalk light appears to be green as the killer attempts to cut her off as she crosses, leading Volkov to begin a verbal argument. The attacker appears to swipe Volkov with something in response, then quickly drives away. The suspect managed to flee the scene, and the police is still in search for him. Yuri left behind a wife, 3 children, and a granddaughter. May he rest in peace. A large-scale drill was held in central Israel earlier this week, simulating major attacks on the much-anticipated subway system with over 1,000 participants. On Tuesday night, Israeli police held a large-scale drill at the soon-to-be-open Tel Aviv light rail, simulating a chemical terrorist attack causing major road congestion and all around the city. Over 1,000 members of the security and emergency services participating in the joint simulation, which was held by the Defense Ministry, the military, police, fire services, health ministry, and the Tel Aviv municipality. Several hundred extras playing the roles of victims with varying degrees of injury. The drill took place in 3 main cities along the new light rail system, Tel Aviv, Bat Yam, and Ramat Gan, as the main part took place at the underground Allenby station in Tel Aviv. The force is also practicing responding to gunshot and bombing attacks in addition to simulating toxic materials being spread on stations and trains, but many foreign observers dare to watch the drill as part of the learning processes. According to the Defense Ministry, the main goal this time was improving national preparedness for a terror incident. The first out of 6 and much anticipated light rail line is expected to open in Tel Aviv in mid-2023 after numerous delays. It will still take a long time before thousands of Israelis can enjoy a real functioning subway network, but it definitely is Israel's largest infrastructure project ever. Now, security is always a concern, but the economy is a close second, and new reports showing that along with rising inflation, consumer and utility prices are also set to rise again. Here to discuss value creation, expert from the Tel Aviv Jaffa Academic College, Alex Koman. Thank you for joining, Alex.
Pleasure.
So, Alex, all prices go up in Israel. Why did the interest rate have to be raised again?
Well, basically, it's to some extent it's lack of leadership. Whatever the head of the central bank in the U.S. is doing, the federal bank, Israel Bank basically replicates, except last time, because in the U.S. they raised it by 0.75%, in Tel Aviv only 0.5%. So that was the dramatic declaration of independence of the head of Israel's bank. So because in the U.S. they raise interest rates to stop inflation, they follow the same thing in Israel.
How do you see this affecting the labor market, the housing prices?
Well, I think it's lack of leadership because, first of all, inflation in Israel is less than half of what it is in the U.S. or Europe. So there's no reason why measures in Israel should be equivalent. Also, raising interest rates is very difficult for couples who've taken mortgages in the easy days, in the days when interest rates were very low. And now we're talking about them paying an extra 1,000 shekels per month. 1,000 shekels per month is very significant, if you take into account that salaries did not rise as much as interest rates did. In addition, if you take into account the fact that entrepreneurs who are building real estate, and real estate in Israel has gone through the roof, they take loans from the banks. So if interest rates are higher, apartments or houses are going to be more expensive because basically the buyers eventually pay for these interest rates. So I think it's too much too late.
It is indeed very significant. How capable are the average Israelis in dealing with the spikes, especially given the stagnating wages, as you just said?
Well, in the past, people were furious because of the high-tech industry, and the perception was that people in the high-tech industry can pay any amount. It's completely indifferent. Well, first of all, that was not the reality, but now it's even worse because we've seen massive layoffs in the high-tech industry. We're talking about Facebook, Amazon, Google, Microsoft. All of them have laid off people. Fortunately, the Bank of Israel was much stricter than they were in the U.S. during the subprime real estate crisis, in the sense that then people would get mortgages of, say, 120% the value of their asset. In Israel, the maximum you can get, the maximum is something like 60-70%. So yes, couples are in trouble, but we do not see the domino effect that was catastrophic in the U.S. with people losing their houses, banks being stuck with all those thousands of houses they didn't know what to do with. So it is a crisis, but it's certainly not as severe as it was in the States. Nothing like it.
Alex, it was back in 2011 that the public became so fed up with the price rises here in Israel that it led to massive tent protests and social unrest. Might we be approaching the time when people will be back on the streets again here?
Well, first of all, when we look at the public, we've just had elections, and the public was really hurting with the inflation and prices rising. Economy was not an issue in the elections. I mean, none of the parties who said they were going to deal with the economy, with real estate, none of them even passed the threshold. So astonishingly, people are weeping, but they're not following their own complaints. I believe that in the future, as inflation keeps rising, but salaries are stagnant, the pain is going to be much more aggressive. And I hope that that's when people would go to the streets or would become much more aggressive regarding demanding reduction in prices. I hope that people would be more conscious. For instance, right now there is a fight between manufacturers and the large supply chains, supermarkets. The supermarkets would refuse to raise prices, and the public will determine whether they succeed. The public, if they insist on buying the cheaper products, they would reinforce the supermarkets, and they would hurt the manufacturers, who would eventually have to reduce the prices again. So it's up to the public. If we are conscious enough, if we're nervous enough, we will get prices to go down.
Alex, thank you so much for coming.
A pleasure.
There was a rare victory for Israel in the United Nations. The UN Economic and Financial Committee overwhelmingly approved an Israeli resolution titled Entrepreneurship for Sustainable Development. The vote was 145 in favor and only 26 opposed. Most Arab countries voted no. The resolution highlights the importance of entrepreneurs worldwide by encouraging governments and the UN to support them. Israel found 12 co-sponsors that included Turkey and Ukraine. Bahrain said it voted no because they do not feel Israel is the right candidate to submit the motion because of its economic treatment of Palestinians. Syria accused Israel of trying to polish its image. The Czech representative spoke in favor and denounced the no votes as being politicized by some parties. Foreign and Economy Ministry officials announced that the talks with Japan, the world's third largest economy in the world, will begin soon. But it may take several years before they are completed. So will Mazda and Toyota become cheaper soon? Let's wait and see. Israel deciding to begin talks with Japan in order to establish a free trade deal that may increase the two countries' annual trade by $3.5 billion. Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid tweeted, "A year ago, my Japanese counterpart and I began discussing ways of deepening our economic ties. Today, Israel and Japan took the first step towards turning that vision into reality." The first stage will be a meeting between representatives of the Foreign and Economy Ministry with relevant Japanese officials. Israeli exports to Japan increasing by 8% in 2020, as imports from Japan also increasing by 10% since last year, then valued close to $2.5 billion. Israel ambassador to Japan, Gilad Cohen, gave his blessing to the move, saying that it is a significant move that could lead to the lowering of tariffs, the discounting of Japanese cars and goods imported to Israel, and help to increase Israeli exports to the country. Hosted under the umbrella of the Jewish Federations of North America, an incredible celebration of idealism in action now set to begin this December in Arizona. The International Lion of Judah Conference, hailed as the premier gathering of dynamic philanthropic Jewish women across the globe, preparing to address some of the greatest challenges of our time. Among the topics for discussion at this year's summit, speakers and cross-industry leaders from the global Jewish community to focus on the continuing rise of violent anti-Semitism, mental health, particularly in the wake of the COVID pandemic, and on answering the needs of those fleeing their homes amidst the invasion of Ukraine. Meanwhile, the organization also celebrating its 50th year of sisterhood at the conference with eyes towards shaping the community's outreach over the next half a century. So register now and learn how to maximize your community's social impact at lionconference.org, the conference from December 11 until the 13th at the Biltmore Hotel. Now, let's take a look at the weather forecast. We're in for wet days with cloudy skies and rain expected around the country tonight, and lows averaging 12 degrees Celsius or 54 Fahrenheit. Then tomorrow we see top temperatures reaching low 20s alongside more rain, and finally on Saturday we can expect more of the same in terms of weather and temperature. Now that's all for today's news. For more updates from Israel on all your devices, check out our ILTV channels on YouTube, Facebook, and Telegram, and subscribe to our ILTV newsletter. I'm amidst. Have a lovely weekend, and thank you so much for watching.